All right, and for tonight's event, we are celebrating Melissa Valentine's book, All of the Flowers, the names of all of the flowers. And so you can pick this book up at your library to go location or at one of those bookstores. Definitely support local independent bookstores. We love bookstores. And it's also just came out on Audible yesterday. So you can also check out the Audible version of the book. At SFPL, it's available on Hoopla as an ebook, which gives unlimited access to all of the people at all of the times. Very lovely book, a memoir, personal. I'm almost all the way through it, and it's a really, really great book and really accessible. And what do I want to say? Brave is not the word. It's being able to put herself out there and share her family experience. I think that was just, I got goosebumps thinking about it just because it's just so personal, and I know people can relate to this, the family dynamic that's happening in the book. Melissa is an award-winning writer from Oakland, California, whose work explores themes of race, trauma, and healing. The Names of All the Flowers is her debut memoir. It was the 2019 winner of the Louise Merriweather First Book Prize. She's a 2020 Artist Fellow of the New York Foundation for the Arts in Nonfiction Literature and has been a fellow at the San Francisco Writers Grotto. Her writing has appeared in New York Magazine, Guernica, Jezebel, and Apogee, among others. She's a visiting professor at the University of California, Santa Cruz. And tonight, Melissa will be in conversation with Amber Butts. Amber is a writer, organizer, and educator who believes that Black folk are already whole. Her work centers on Black children, Black mamas, and Black elders. It asks big and small questions about how we move forward toward actualizing spaces that center tenderness, nuance, and joy while living in a world reliant on Black terror. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Melissa and Amber. Thank you so much for being here, and it's all you.
Thank you all for joining us tonight. Melissa, I'm so excited to be in conversation with you about all the things Oakland, books, your book, and every talk that I participate in. I like to also just acknowledge and thank the writers, attendees, and participants for inviting us into their homes. It's an honor, regardless of whether it's virtual or not, to be invited into these spaces. So thank you all, and thank you, Melissa.
Absolutely. Thank you, Amber, for being in conversation tonight. And thank you to the San Francisco Public Library and everyone here in the audience and those watching on other formats as well. I'm really honored to be here for a couple reasons. You know, Oakland is my hometown and my book is all about Oakland love, but I don't live in Oakland right now. So it feels like I'm at home right now. And as Amber said, thank you for inviting us into your homes. This is such a strange time, and we get to be oddly more intimate with each other and, you know, on Zoom here. So I appreciate everyone for coming out tonight and on your Wednesday evening. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Melissa.
Yeah. So I thought I would start, just kind of open the space with a reading. I'll read for a couple minutes. This is towards the end of the book. I think you'll understand the context, so I won't give away too much. I'll just start. It is the day before his funeral, the day of the viewing. Let's get your hair done, Danielle suggests. I let myself be pulled like a balloon to a hair salon with Danielle. We wander there on foot, looking for the first place that offers the service we seek, to be changed. The salon is near the high school I just switched out of, near a familiar bus stop where kids gather in groups waiting for buses to go home or cut school. It is on the Oakland side of the dividing line that separates the city from Piedmont. We walk over the hill and cross the threshold. Neither of us has been here before. There's a liquor store in the corner that I've seen many times. In all this time, I never knew there was a tiny salon tucked away in the back. We are the only customers. A woman greets us and asks us what we want. I'm in a dream state, and I let Danielle speak for both of us. Just a press, she says, for her. She points to me, and the woman invites me to sit in a chair. She tells me what to do in between sips of her sweating beverage. I smell alcohol in her breath as she talks. Come here, put your head back like this. She washes my hair, and for the first time in a while, I remember I have a body. I remember joy, until I am pulled back from the sensation violently and brought back to the knowing. Dead, dead, dead. He did not make it. Like being slapped or having freezing water thrown onto you, I remember. Danielle sits in a chair next to the door and watches us. All three of us are reflected in the mirror. One of us is drunk. Two of us are floating. One of us is trying to have a sense of control. One of us is being altered by the pressing comb. While the woman sips and combs and sips and combs, attempting to transform me, Danielle and I look into the mirror at each other, at ourselves, past the reflection. While we look, we both know that everyone else is viewing Junior's body, that he is now being pulled out of a drawer, that his head is wrapped up in cloth to conceal his head wound, that his body will be empty of him, that he is gone. The woman sips and straightens. Danielle and I stare into the mirror, and in between every second, it returns. Dead, dead, dead. The woman announces she is finished. Danielle walks over to me. She strokes my hair. Do you like it? We look into the mirror again, this time at me. I look like someone beautiful. I look like a normal person. I look like I could have a brother who was alive. I look like I could be happy. I look like someone who could want things. I look different, I say. Still, we stare into the mirror. Neither one of us can smile. Neither one of us knows why we are here. We are the blind leading the blind. The morning trying to remember being alive. We are two women who have lost. What are we looking for? Some sign of change, some physical representation of what is transformed inside us. Some acknowledgement that we are different now, marked. All I can say is, I look different. I'd like to look different. I'd like to look into the mirror and see someone bigger, someone more powerful. I'd like to look so different that when people look at me, they could know the secret I carry. But I look the same. I look like a girl. I look normal. I look unharmed by my knowing that boys like my brother die every day, and families like mine must try to go on living. No one will know how different I am, how traumatized I am. No one will know my secret. I wear my straightened hair to the funeral the next day. I wear the only appropriate dress I have. It is a long black dress with a white floral motif that I wore to my 8th grade graduation. I catch glimpses of myself in glass doors and windows, and I don't recognize myself. And that feels right. Who am I without my brother? How did I get to this chapel? Who drove me here? Did I walk? I am pulled places. I have no control over my body. It moves. It goes here or there. It wants nothing. When I walk into the chapel, I see a bulletin board filled with pictures of Junior from his whole little life. Baby, teen, baby, child, teen, man. I stare at them, and then I stand back and watch as more and more people fill into the room. Black people, white people, Quaker people, street people, kids I've seen around our old high school. One by one, they pull my limp body into theirs and squeeze me, tell me, hey, we're so sorry. They tell me, you'll get through this. They tell me, you'll survive. And in the seconds between death, when a thought enters, I think, I don't want to survive then. If this is something to be survived, I don't want to survive. If this is something to get through, I don't want to make it to the other side. That thing in me that's changed wants to let itself be seen, wants to let itself be changed by the part of this death that is universal, that is more personal even than family. The part of this tragedy that can be described as an epidemic, the part of this tragedy that is so old, it has been written in books, the part of this death that is all of ours. Every single person walking into this chapel is part of it. I haven't been spared, and I won't survive. None of us will. You, and you, and you. You're all as dead as me, and you're all in as much danger. Because as long as we are dying in the streets like animals, each one of us is a little bit dead. Each one of us in danger. The anger and the secret and the death and the love all mixed together now. They come in swarms. Then a new thought enters. God, how loved he was. How many different kinds of people loved him. And I sit back outside myself and I watch in awe. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. I'm going to invite us all to take a deep breath just for a few seconds. Hold it if we can, and release it. Thanks for that reading. I read this book twice, and each time I read it, I wanted to start it back up again, but I knew that it needed time in between. Because, you know, at its core, for me at least, my reading of it was like really deep grief work, and not grief in the sense of you know, it just being grief, but it encompassing all the things, and how you talk about how loved your brother was, and you were able to witness that, and you also allowed us to see how loved he was in the book. And how much you still love him. And also how funny and wild and amazing he was. And so thank you for that, Melissa. Okay, so we're gonna jump into a question first. Let's talk about, we're both from Oakland. I love reading about Oakland from different folks' perspectives, and we all say the same thing about the weather. But yeah, so you're from Oakland and you now live in New York. So let's talk a little bit about the transition or decisions you made to leave. How was it growing up here? What's your relationship to the town now?
Mm-hmm.
And also, when did you decide to leave and why?
Lots of questions there. So yes, I live in New York now, and I have, first of all, I love Oakland. It is my home. It's always going to be my home. I think of it just so fondly. It's so familiar to me, and growing up in Oakland was just so special. I mean, I feel like people who grow up in the Bay have this, like, I don't know, it's just this magical experience that is like hard to describe to other people. They're like, but it's just a small city with a little lake. But it's so much better than that. It's so much more than that. And what was so special about growing up in Oakland was things that you take for granted, really. It was so diverse, like truly diverse. I grew up going to school. I mean, I had friends literally from like every ethnicity that you could think of. And that was just my reality. And it wasn't until I started to visit other places later in life that I started to really appreciate that, because you can take it for granted. And also being mixed race, you know, my mom is Black, my dad is white, and growing up mixed race in Oakland didn't feel strange at all. It actually felt quite normal. And, you know, I grew up, there were just tons of interracial families around me. We weren't the only ones. And so that is something that, you know, upon leaving, I realized was just not the norm everywhere else, you know, so very special experience. I left Oakland twice. So this is my second round leaving Oakland, being away from Oakland. And both times, actually, I went to New York. The first time for college. So I was 18, 19, and it was right around, my brother was murdered when I was 16. So it was still very, very new to me, that trauma. And part of healing from his death and dealing with that grief was this sense, like holding on to this sense that I needed to get out of this place. And this place wasn't safe for me. And Oakland has many sides, right? Oakland is a wonderful, beautiful, diverse, radical, progressive place that has amazing produce and food, and just there's so many wonderful things about it. But when I was growing up as a teenager in the 90s and into the early 2000s, having witnessed my brother's murder, it felt it felt like it didn't feel like a safe place. And even growing up inside of my family home didn't feel like a safe place. And I think when we leave, when we go to find another home, for me anyway, I'm always searching for safety. That's kind of what home is to me, So the first time I left, it was like survival. It was like I felt like my ticket to survival was going to be college, and that's a long story too, because I almost flunked out of high school and almost didn't go to college. But I did in the end, and it was in part because of his death. That was so motivating and inspiring. Like, this is how I'm going to get out. And so I went to New York for college, and then I returned, and I stayed for about 7 years the last time around. And I was a different person. Oakland was a different place, and I wrote my book in that chunk of time. I wrote most of it. And in order to finish it, I think I had to leave again, actually. So it was partly like an emotional distance that I needed from the city, where these events that I was writing about had taken place. I needed to get out in order to finish and like revise and make it a book. And also I was becoming a really angry person, because of what Oakland was becoming to me. Someone who grew up and it was this special sacred place that a lot of people didn't know about, didn't care about. And that was great, stay out. And then everything changed, right? And it was just like gentrification just blew up, and suddenly I didn't recognize my city, and it felt really painful and hurtful to me. And I wanted to leave. And so I went to Brooklyn, and the same thing was happening there, but it wasn't as personal to me. And I hope to return, because now I've written this book and I have that space from it. I don't need to grapple with that same trauma anymore. I can go back home, and maybe I can write something different, because something has opened up, because I've done this thing.
Yeah, I hear all of that. And also Oakland I'm in West Oakland. I'm from East Oakland, and it is in a lot of ways heartbreaking and traumatic to see how much it's changed. And I go on walks or I ride my bike, and I'm like, okay, 3 weeks ago that was a kind of rundown store, and now they've closed it to make it high rises. Yeah, it is. It's a very unique experience. So thanks for sharing that. Let's move into some more questions. I mean, I had to like limit the questions that I had personally, because I wanted to have like 50 questions for you, but of course that's not feasible. But I was really drawn to the windows you let us into with your family, and both how like when you were in Oakland and when you visited Alabama. And you've already kind of talked a little bit about home, but what do you miss most about both places?
I'll start with Alabama. It's a place I write about Alabama a lot in my book, because it was such a big part of my youth. My mom is from Alabama, and my mom was a sharecropper, so that history is just so real to me. And, going back home and seeing the place where she used to live, there's my grandparents' land. And then, we always take a trip kind of down the road, and my mom and my aunts, like, we're in the car and they're pointing here and there, and they're like, oh, we used to live there. and they're pointing to like some bushes, you know, like there was such poverty. And, you know, she grew up before they moved into this house, which after she moved to California, she helped pay for, you know, it was much like an immigrant experience of like leaving, going to a new country, sending money back home, you know, to create, you know, wealth for your family in some way, like little, as much as you can. So it's really a special place. And it's such a like living part of my mom's history and my history. But what I miss, what I guess I will say I miss most is my grandmother, because she died when I was really young, and she's so special to my mom. And I feel like if she were living, we would be really close, you know? So I like, it's like this feeling of missing something that you've never had. And I also miss the red dirt, and it's just red dirt roads, which as a child, I was just like, how is this possible? It's so amazing. It's red. I miss the red dirt roads, and I also miss the kudzu. Does anyone know what kudzu is? It's like this crazy vine it must be invasive, that just grows everywhere, and it covers entire trees, and it creates these like wild shapes. And so you're driving down the dirt road, and it's like this mythical place full of these giant shapes covered in like green. So that's how I remember it. I miss that. I do miss that. It's such a special place. In Oakland, I miss my family. Oakland changes, you know, cities change, things change, but people, you know, are so important. And my family, as complicated as my family is, you know, I wrote a memoir, and usually you don't write a memoir if you have like the best relationship with your family. And I have in my life needed distance from them, you know, which I'm taking right now. But I miss my family, and I appreciate them so much. They've given me so much. They've given me stories. They've given me, you know, they've created me for better or worse.
Yeah, I feel like all of that's necessary distance. And also like I feel like you wrote a lot of honest things about your life and your family and your community, right? And I feel like you did it with care. Like I didn't read it as malicious. One of my favorite references is I like the show Queen Sugar, and Nova Bordelon. She wrote a book on the show, and she didn't really consult her family members in the way that she could have. And I feel like this book and how you've written it, you know, it shows a lot of care in a different way than what she did fictionally.
So glad to hear that.
Yeah. We can keep, if you want, talking a little bit about home. I have a question really about kind of what does it mean to you right now to create a new home? And what must your place have for you to be able to feel safe, that sense of safety that you were returning to?
It's always evolving, you know, like I said, when I first moved to New York, that safety was like, I need to survive. And I had that instinct, like I have to leave this place to become who I need to become, you know, and that was safety. And sometimes safety is emotional, sometimes it's physical. And I would say like, so that's always, the definition is always changing. Your needs are always changing. But right now in my life, like who I am right now, safety for me is my partner, you know, and, you know, I'm good. If he's here, I'm good. He's around, I'm good. So that he makes me feel very safe. But also just in creating a home, because like I live far away from one of my homes, and I've created homes in many different places. But I think it's such a luxury and a privilege to feel safe, you know, and for many of us, we've had to work really hard and go through a lot of healing to feel safety. So I don't take for granted. I'm so grateful for, you know, being able to have like nice things around me, like you know, just soft things, even like crystals and like a bathtub and a nice comfortable bed, you know, like these are things that make you feel like you're abundant and you can like you're okay. You know, you have a place to recharge.
Mm-hmm. And we all need the space to be able to visualize and also actualize those spaces. And unfortunately, in this world, they're treated as luxuries when they should be, you know, they are human rights, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely, Amber.
Yeah. Let's talk craft for a bit. So many things to talk with you about that I'll talk with you about. We'll talk together at another time because I have lots of ideas and excitement. But let's go with how did you embody a child's voice?
You know, the decision to write from a child's perspective really felt so natural. It's how I started, and it just worked, and I kept doing that for the whole book. It didn't feel limiting. It can, like, writing from that perspective can feel really limiting. It can feel very you know, simplistic. Like, I start the book when I'm 6 years old, but there are ways to weave in that dimension and that depth. There's definitely ways to do that. So and then the voice also evolves, right? The voice is growing up. So it's like the book takes place from 6 to 16, and then there's an epilogue around like 30. So it's quite a span of time, and it's in the present tense for the whole book. But the little girl who is telling the majority of the book, little me, she I think I just probably wanted to be close to her and like befriend her and know her. And it became really fun and really healing too, because so much of the book, there's this theme of like smallness in the book. Like, she feels so small and she's like, I feel so powerless. And that is the experience of a child, you know, like your life is dictated by the adults around you and could go either way. You know, so it's kind of scary to be a child. Really, your life is in other people's hands. You have no power, truly. But that experience for me as a super emotional, sensitive child who, you know, wasn't necessarily nourished and nurtured in that way, I think she needed some support, you know, and so I went back to her and I feel like we wrote this book together. And it was, yeah, I feel like I have so much more compassion for my little self. And it's funny to talk about them as two different people because obviously I'm one person, you know, but it's a really beautiful thing to be able to kind of do some inner child work while you're writing your book, and heal parts of you. And, you know, so she was dealing with not feeling heard, you know, and me writing this book gave her a voice. She was dealing with feeling powerless, and, you know, writing this book made her feel powerful. So so yeah, and I've never actually talked about it in this way before. It's really interesting. And now when I have those feelings of not being enough and feeling powerless and, you know, feeling unloved or unheard or all those human feelings that we often feel, I do think I'm able to have a little bit more self-compassion, you know, for the little me, for me. So yeah, I mean, I hope that was a very like woo answer, but a lot of craft work also went into writing from a child's voice. And, you know, just like, yeah, it took a lot of work to grow that voice over time for that span of time. It was very careful craft work. Yeah. And like making sure I could weave in the adult perspective, because obviously that's there. It's me telling the story now, you know.
Yeah, it feels like definitely, I was going to say inner child work because it feels very much like, your inner child and your current self and all of the versions of yourself that you've been and currently are in communication with each other in a way that feels very special and unique to this book. And also to, a unique skill that you have, which is also probably because you were a very aware and sensitive child and are still a very aware and sensitive person. And I think I was just really excited about the access points that you had. And then I think too, one of the things I've been thinking about a lot is the ways that folks are also reparenting themselves in doing the inner child work, because you have to build a relationship with the inner child in order to be able to be honest and also apologize, which a lot of children don't hear, regardless of where they grew up or what the socioeconomic, political, ethnic backgrounds they came from. Okay, let's move into more questions. I have so many. Let's talk about the theme of flowers and how it's present throughout the book. Why did you choose the name of all the flowers as your book title?
The names of all the flowers was a line in my book. And the line, the scene where it lives in the book is, I'm talking to my brother Junior. We're around we're both teenagers, and this is before he goes off to prison. So my brother spent the first year of his adult life in prison, right? So this is all leading up to that. So this is before that happens and before he's killed. And but I'm getting really worried about him. And he's sort of getting really into crime, and he's selling drugs. And I know a little bit, I just know a sliver of what he's doing. He does bring me into his world, but only so much. I'm his little sister, So, and I used to go into his bedroom when he'd come home, because he was kind of in and out of the house and kind of out a lot. And I wanted to know what my older brother was up to, and so I'd go into his room and sit on his bed and kind of, just ask him questions, talk about little sister, big brother stuff. And it was in one of these moments where I'm kind of praying in a way, we're in this space together, and this is when the voice zooms out, right? So it's not the child voice, it's not in the moment, it's zooming out. And I'm just sort of, it's almost like a prayer, I'm just I don't really want you to be, I just want us to be who we are. I want us to be brother and sister. I don't want you to be a drug dealer. I don't want you to have that name. I don't want you to have the name thug. I don't want you to have the name criminal. I don't want you to have those names. And it's sort of this desperate prayer for him to just be who he is, right? And who he is, acknowledging in that moment, is so much bigger than that. And it's so much more beautiful than those stereotypes and those labels that I'm seeing the world put on him, and I'm seeing him go down this path. And it's just heartbreaking for me, even as a teenager, because I can see it so clearly. And it's the whole house is just waiting, because we know what happens to boys like him. We know what happens in this, we know how this story ends, and we're living it. So in that moment, I'm just saying, I wish that you would just honor you're all the flowers. You are so huge. You are transcendent. You're bigger than all of this. You are so beautiful. And so that's where that the title of my book lives, in that kind of transcendent wish for him and for me, and really for all of us, to be more than those labels, and whatever that means to you, And so it's that transcendence. It's also, weave throughout the book, my father is a landscaper. So we did know a lot of the names of a lot of flowers growing up. And, flowers and trees and different plants kind of weave their way into the book, just because that was part of our world. My dad used to quiz us when we'd go on drives, and, we wouldn't get the treat unless we got the name of the tree right. This was very important to him. So it's kind of an honor to my dad legacy, you know. And it's of course in honor of all of the lives that are lost to gun violence, because, you know, in the cover of my book, it's really meaningful. You know, it's a street grave and it has all these flowers. And I was thinking very much of that, you know, it's these nameless people who are killed that, you know, we don't talk about, we don't honor, they're just really forgotten. We don't say their names. They're not part of the Black Lives Matter movement. You know, it's a little bit too complicated to fit so neatly into any box. And so I really felt the need to just say his name and to include all of these nameless people and kind of put them all into this category of like flowers, in this kind of beautiful metaphor.
It's also so much about community, right? Like folks in the neighborhood and outside of the neighborhood travel to these memorial sites, which is what they are, right? And they pay homage to the folks we've lost, and they make offerings, flowers, you know, candles, their favorite things, photos, any way to remember the lives.
Yeah.
And I think too, in the face of like all of the gentrification that's happening, one of the real realities is that those lives can be erased in those places, right? And so I love that, you know, you are refusing that and saying, hey, this is a life. And also, I don't want to get too far into the book, but I love the way that you complicate this kind of expectation or representation that Black children especially have to be good or bad in order to receive care when they are just already deserving of it. And how, you know, already that categorization of bad is a prison to school pipeline thing that just reinforces carceral legacies that are really unfair. I have so many questions that I'm not going to ever get to. But one of the, I think, most important questions before we move into the Q&A portion is I want to talk a little bit about care. What care practices have you prescribed yourself since publishing the book? And have you kind of built or enforced any new boundaries for yourself? Professionally, family-wise, whatever?
I love that question. And I think it's a work in progress for me. But yeah, I mean, one boundary is the physical boundary, right? Like I'm in New York, and it's funny that I live in New York when my very Oakland book publishes, you know? And I think it was subconscious. I think it was totally subconscious, but I think that was a boundary for me. Like I didn't want to be, I don't think I wanted to be near my family when this book came out because it was too much. It was just like, I mean, I dealt with a lot of, I knew it was going to bring up so much for my family. It's really painful, you know? And I have created characters out of my family, and, you know, my parents, my father in this book is, you know, I think he was probably the most sensitive to this book when it came out and felt the most hurt. And I've gotten a lot of support from other family, but you know, I think that was like the physical boundary for me was the biggest one. It was like, we can talk on the phone and I get to decide when that call ends, you know? Whereas if I live in the same city, it's just too close. So I've gone through all that, and I'm still processing that. And I think I'm ready, you know, to return home. I think we've dealt with it, and my siblings, you know, have, you know, it just opens a wound. It opens a wound. And I guess another boundary too is throughout my writing process, I had to tell my family members, I had a few rules. The first one was, I don't want feedback. And the second one was, okay, I don't want feedback. I only want praise. So if you don't have anything, if you want to critique or say like, I didn't say it that way, just keep it to yourself. I only want to hear good things. And that was part of my process, because it's really tough to write a memoir and have other people's voice in it. So that was a boundary as I was writing. And then the boundary that I had with my family too when it came out was, I have written this book for 7 years. I've been with this grief. I've been with, I've detached myself from it. I've been inside it. I've been all around it, right? And now it's your turn. And I don't think that I can be the one to like hold your hand through it. And you guys have to be with each other through it. And so I did set that boundary as well. So I didn't think I had any boundaries, and it turns out I did.
Oh, boundary work, constant. Yeah, I think we have to transition into questions, but I wanted to just give a little bit of praise for this book, and also say that one of my favorite scenes in the book is when you and your family are in Alabama, and there's a storm and there's lightning and everyone is afraid. And your brother Junior is outside. He has a bar of soap in his hand and he just like starts washing his body. And like, I love that. It was just so, I could see it all happening. And I just think that was so beautiful. And I'm so grateful you put that in your book. So thank you.
Absolutely. He was so full of life and energy and wild in so many ways, and I wanted to make sure that was captured. He was a really special, vibrant person.
So there's a question from Lucy, and it's, hello, thanks for speaking with us. Had you envisioned yourself as a memoirist prior to writing this particular book, or did you become a memoirist on account of having written this book? When did you realize you had to write the story? It's a great question.
When did I realize I had to write this book?
When did you realize you had to write this story?
Yeah. I did become a memoirist as I was writing this book and after writing this book. But I think I will leave that title open to other things in the future too. And writer is good enough, because I want to write other things as well. I've always been an observer, and you can tell through the book that this child is observing her surroundings so fiercely. And I have always just taken note of human behavior, and my family was a great study, and I journaled since I knew how to write, and I've always documented my life. It wasn't until I went to college that I started to explore storytelling in different ways. So I actually wanted to be an actress, and I was studying theater in college, and I was really interested in characters and embodying characters, and so that was like my first pathway into storytelling. And then eventually I started dabbling in writing classes, and when I took a nonfiction class, you have to come up with a story, and this was clear. It was so clear that this was my story, and it just started knocking, and it didn't stop knocking until it was done.
Those knocks be loud. Oof.
Oh.
We have another question. A line from your reading, this is from Evita, a line from your reading struck me. If this is something to survive, I don't want to survive it. You said you didn't want to see what was on the other side. At what point did that change for you?
It's been a process. I think part of grieving, especially when you're grieving at such a young age, is I learned these terms much later, but like survivor's guilt. I did not want to even be alive. And I didn't have language for that when I was a teenager or a young adult. I didn't have language for not feeling like I deserved to be alive. And I learned that much later, you know, when I went to therapy and started, you know, looking at myself and my trauma. But in that moment that I read, you know, it had just happened. And when I think the first part of grief is like, you're so terrified of forgetting that person. And you do not want anyone telling you you're gonna get over this, you're gonna be okay. It's like, that's the worst thing you can tell someone. And as a teenager, I was just so angry, like, I don't want to survive this. No, I want him to live forever in my memory. I never want to forget this. And I think for like the first few years of grief, it was just about like remembrance, you know. So and over time through healing, you know, I learned that I do want to be alive, and I deserve to be alive, and I deserve to have things, and I deserve to have a life, and it's okay, and I can let go, and I don't have to be so hyper vigilant, and I can have a life, you know, and I can like let go a little bit and breathe. And so it was a long process, you know, but eventually I did want to see the other side of my own life, you know, and my own experience.
Yeah, I think it's also a way that we honor our dead. When I was in middle school and high school, so many people I knew had been killed just, you know, walking down the street, going to parties. And so somebody would be in class and the next day they wouldn't, you know, and then
Exactly.
family members also, you know, and just from a lot of different forms of violence. And I think, you know, we also have to hold the hope in the relationship of like memory, but also of you know, honoring. And I think we do honor them by living and committing, you know, to living happier lives.
Yeah, totally.
We have more questions. Okay, so I feel like you kind of talked about memoirs, but so I'm not gonna actually ask that question. But we have another question that's, what was it like for you to write about your very personal and very private grief in such a public way for such an extended period of time?
Well, it wasn't public for a long time. And so writing this book was extremely private and personal for a long time. And I hoped that someone would care about it and that someone would want to publish it, because I was an ambitious person and I thought, you know, I'm doing this thing. I want it to go somewhere and be something, you know, but it was really private and I didn't share it with many people for a long time. I went to grad school, and that's when I really started sharing it publicly for the first time in a kind of a safe, well, you know, safe in quote space, and getting feedback for the first time. And the response, I think, gave me a lot of courage and a lot of confidence to keep going, and that people did care and that they were interested in this family and this girl. And so I just kept going, you know, but yeah, it was definitely private for a long time. And even after that experience of sharing in a class, like it continued to be private. You know, writing a book is very solitary. And I'm not someone who seeks out a lot of feedback because I was really on a roll. And, you know, I kind of honored the sacredness of the writing. And I didn't want, and especially being so personal, I was really particular about who I would let read and give me feedback and whose feedback I would take, you know. And later on that became like an agent, and later on an editor, and you know, made it a better book. But it wasn't until Pub Day last year that this book became public, and it has been a journey, but it's been a good one, because I feel like the healing message, people have really taken that, and I've gotten so many beautiful messages from readers. And, you know, if it helps one person, then that's like, I've done my job, you know. But I think it's helped a lot of people, and a lot of people have gotten something out of my work. So that's all I want.
Our last question is from Cecilia. Is editing harder than writing?
Yes, it is. Because of structure and because of plot. Even in a memoir, you need a plot. You need like to have a point, you know, like, why am I saying this? What does it mean? And that part of the revision process, you know, is the hardest because you have to ask yourself really tough questions. You have to cut a lot. Yeah, I would say that's harder, but it's a beautiful place to arrive at because it means you have a draft, you know, which is a huge accomplishment.
Are there any other things you want to share with the attendees?
Thank you for listening, for coming, for your beautiful questions. I know we've shared a lot about my book. I read from the end of my book, so I hope you'll still read it. I hope you'll still read the beginning and the middle. You know, I'm very clear when the book opens how it ends, so it's no surprise. But just thank you so much for your support and for listening. This has been a wonderful conversation. Yeah, and thank you so much, Amber. I loved your questions. You have great questions.
Thank you so much, Melissa, and everyone who's here and participating in the chat and on YouTube and whatever else is out there in the world. We're super grateful to have you here, especially during this time. And please, you know, grab Melissa's book for family members and also, you know, support your public libraries.
Thank you for that, library love. And we thank all of the people for being here tonight. And if you haven't attended an SFPL program, check us out. We're doing lots of stuff almost every night of the week. So there is the library community. We are still here and we miss you, San Francisco. We love you. Melissa and Amber, thank you so much for being here. We're honored to have you. And congratulations on the book, and pick it up today. I put all those links in the box and I'll send a follow-up email to the folks who registered. YouTube, thank you for being here. Amber, Lisa, thank you so much. Amber, Melissa, and Lisa, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good night, San Francisco.